Greetings everyone, welcome to Libertarian Europe. I'm Lucas Nunes. Today we have a special guest here. He's from France. He writes articles in French regarding libertarianism. He's an editor, having edited the book Libre, 100 Ideas, 100 Authors. He's a translator of libertarian books to the French language. He's a specialist in cybersecurity, and he's one of the founders of the French libertarian movement. His name is Stéphane Geyres. Thank you for being here today, Stéphane.
Good evening, Lucas. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
I would like to start with a question of how is libertarianism doing in France right now?
That's an interesting question. Thank you. Yeah, I guess, yes, that's, how can I say? I would say it's not going too well at some point, but on the other hand, I do see a lot of positive movements over the last years or so. So if I'm stepping back, and I'll try to make a short story, but if I'm stepping back, I think libertarianism has been in France for probably 2, 3 generations now. To some level extent, I guess we discussed this. My own involvement, and I guess reference you made about the mouvement des Libertariens, dates back to, what is it? It's like some 10 years or so, say. And if I'm looking backwards, we probably were more dynamic 10 years ago, probably, I would say. And probably there was more hope about the libertarian movements to have any positive influence on freedom in France. A lot more than what we have right now. But on the other hand, more positively, I do see a lot more people being aware of the word libertarian, uh, being curious about it, getting interest, coming to us to know more, watching videos, buying books in French or other languages. So, on one hand, I believe it is not so positive because I see a lot of slowdown in terms of the energy that we put overall to move forward, and liberty as a whole has been downgraded, I would say, over especially last year. But so yeah, the result is not too positive. But on the other hand, I see a lot more interest from the younger generations, like yourself, for instance, which hopefully is raising hope for the long-term future.
That's very interesting. And how did libertarianism start in France?
I cannot really tell this because from what I know, I would say I have 3 milestones in mind. The first one is probably the word libertarien, the French for libertarian, meaning slightly differently, by the way, we can talk about that, was created or first appeared in a series of books by Henri Lepage in the 80s. So I guess the first occurrence of libertarian in France dates back to the 80, I don't know, 85 or something like this. Then the movement started one generation ago, with especially through the impulse of Bertrand Le Ménissier, now passed unfortunately, who was a university professor of economy and law. Uh, and definitely a stronger impulse into creating I would say, the first generation of the mouvement des libertariens. And then when I created it again, or recreated it, I would say 10, 12 years ago, with a group of friends, we had basically gathered from networking over the social networks, I would say. So it was a rebirth from a group of completely spread out friends, not even being aware at the beginning of the initial version from Bertrand Le Ménissier. So it's pretty new rebirth, and it's all thanks to all of us trying to find other libertarian like every one of us through the social networks, I guess. So thank you for this social network.
Yeah, the social networks have been helping a lot libertarianism to be spread, I think, not only in France, but in many countries, Brazil, in the US, also in the UK, and Murray Rothbard would say ideas do not float by themselves in the vacuum. They are influential only insofar as they are adopted and put forward by people. For the idea of liberty to triumph, then there must be an active group of dedicated libertarians, people who are knowledgeable in liberty and are willing to spread the message to others. What are the biggest challenges for the ideas of liberty to be spread in France?
Oh, uh, I guess the first one, the biggest one, is the overall environment, political and media environment. I mean, also the education system. We are, and it's not specific to France in any way, but we are completely drowned in an environment where freedom, liberté, is a very strong paradox where we are supposed to be one of the core history-wise country from liberty, where liberty is the first word of our motto on every single uh, official building that we have. And at the same time, it's completely despised everywhere in the news, in the government, in the propaganda, in the education system, in the political system, in the leftist voice, pretty much everywhere. Uh, so the environment, the way people depict liberty, I would say, is completely negative. There is a strong culture, and it's not only from now, it's probably coming from, I don't know, many generations already. But in France, very strangely enough, people want to be free. They call for liberty, but the idea of liberty that they have is usually very negative. So I would say the biggest one that we need to fight is precisely to go against the stream, again, the mainstream and pretty much every mainstream, to try to re-clarify, connect people with the true meaning of liberty and simply have them realize that what they daily looking for on a daily basis is in fact liberty, but they don't even realize this. So to make it short, obviously there's a lot of communication to be done. That's what I've been trying myself over the years in whichever way I've been able to. Books, videos, you name it. But yeah, to make it short, I think it's not political system. I think it's not history. I think it's just the overall communication and propaganda environment which conveys a meaning for liberty, which is completely biased and distorted compared to what it truly should be.
That's very interesting. I always thought about this liberté, égalité, fraternité,
Yeah.
and how do the other two words play in the minds of the French people?
Yeah, that's a good one. I guess liberté has been distorted in a way where people want to be free to do basically whatever they want. And the meaning has been shifted and focused on I should be able, physically speaking, not in terms of rights, okay, but physically, I like to be. I mean, to be free for them would be, for example, I'm able to fly. Then I would be free to fly. That's the meaning most people have for liberty. And the same kind of shift has been happening for equality. I believe that the original meaning from the three-word motto is really equality against the law. Uh, we are all supposed to be equal against the law. I think that's the understanding, at least I have, from a history perspective. Now it's really about equality in terms of revenue, resources, redistribution. It's the financial equality. Okay, so there should not be rich, there should not be poor. We should all be even in terms of wealth. That's the meaning, the shift of meaning that is predominant uh, in France currently. And even fraternité. Fraternité comes from brothers, it's brotherhood, literally. We don't even use this anymore. It's not about brotherhood anymore, which is about another French word would be entraide, that is basically helping one another, literally again. That's the same meaning, in my opinion, as fraternité. No, now we have shifted for solidarité. And solidarity is another shifted word because in legal and insurance meaning it means that we are all binded to this. In case of an incident, we are all binded to support one another. From an insurance perspective, we are bound to how can I say, mandatory wise, we are supposed to supporting each other, which is completely different from fraternity, which means that it's not mandatory, but it should be spontaneous. It should be the mindset, I would say. At least that's the way I'm reading it. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is the three words have been going through a shift on every one of them, and it's systematically a shift from common sense, liberty, traditional values to values which are pretty much those of the left. Capability is the dream of being able to do pretty much anything. Equality is revenue equality is no rich, no poor. And solidarity means basically the same. If we are within solidarity, that means that you should pay for me. That's really what it means. So, yeah, I guess it's just another expression, evidence of the overall shift of mindset over 200 years from traditional kind of values to leftist values, if I'm making it very simple.
Yes, that's very interesting that you talked about solidarité. I was going to talk about that because, from a foreign perspective, I hear this word a lot when I read the French newspapers, watch the French TV, and listen to the French radio. It's talking a lot about solidarity, but every time they talk about that, I have the feeling that they are talking about this idea of socialism.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Again, I mean, I don't have the dictionary official definition in my mind, but I'm pretty sure that if you dive into the traditional definition for solidarité, it's coming from the insurance. It means, guys, if something happens to a group, then the whole group should step up and be binding one another, okay, committed to one another to help should something happen to one of you as a group, which is okay when it's only active through an insurance company, because basically an insurance would implement such solidarity through the contracts they have and through the randomness of their own processing on incidents. So that's typically the example. But that's not the way we go through this meaning anymore. Uh, we all people claim for solidarity, but in fact, what they mean is, well, you need to pay for me. I'm on a special social program. I'm basically on unemployed, so I should have unemployment benefits, or I should have RSA, which is yet another social benefit. Such benefits are typically what would be covered under the solidarity buzzwords.
And another question I have is that, studying a bit of the French history, and as I got more involved with France, because my wife is French, I started to see that the Republic has a very big role in the French society, and it affects the French mentality quite a lot. What do you have to say about that?
I can only confirm. I think it would be very difficult to find a significant area of life, let's say, where you would not be finding the La République, the state, basically, having something to say in terms of some regulation law somewhere that typically would put their nose into your dealings. That's for sure. It's very, very difficult to find any area where the Republic is not here to tell you what you should do. Where does that come from? I guess that's a good question. It's a long, I think it comes from a long tradition in France dating back to Louis XIV, the kings, La Révolution, Napoleon. We've been all over those 200, 250 years, always gone through this appeal for how can I say, les grands hommes. So typically people who will be taking care for ourselves. We are always calling as a people. We are always calling for that gentleman, miraculous gentleman, who's going to lead us to the future and show us the way. That's typically French mindset, be it on the right, on the left. So from that history mindset, it is completely uh, possible and relevant for La République to put their nose pretty much everywhere. And people expect or even are demanding that La République should be putting their nose everywhere. So it may be more complicated than that, certainly. There's the dimension of psychology, of culture, of propaganda as well. Many dimensions certainly come into play. But I do believe that it's a long, long, unfortunate tradition dating back, yeah, pretty much when Louis XIV say, "L'État c'est moi," the state it's me. I think that would be typically a cornerstone from the history perspective.
That's very interesting. And talking about your libertarian projects, in which libertarian projects have you been involved recently?
Well, I've been involved in probably way too many, I guess. Um, Probably two significant ones that you can find on the net would be a website that I created with a team of authors. The name is Vue d'ailleurs, or VDA as a shortcut. Vue d'ailleurs is a simple website like a blog, except that it's written by something like 10 different people, including myself, but not only myself, where on a totally irregular basis we try to address the news, some fundamental concepts from liberty or libertarian clauses, projects, pretty much anything from the news to theory, I would say, with always a different style in writing, always a different angle, sometimes pretty humoristic, sometimes history. We've always had some correspondence between, so exchanges between authors, for instance. So we try different angles for writing, and I believe it's been around for now 3 years, and I believe it's probably one of the most consistent and strongly libertarian blog available in France in French. It's exclusively in French. And there are other blogs very active in the liberal movement. Probably the most well-known one would be Contrepoint, but Contrepoint is pretty much publishing, uh, pretty much any kind of even remotely liberal kind of writing. Vue d'ailleurs is very strongly libertarian. It's almost an ARCAP from the beginning. So that would be one, and we probably are. I think we have passed 400 articles overall, which is significant, I would say. That's one. And another one which we are pushing and giving some dynamics currently is Les Éditions Résurgence, which also is a website where we have a catalog of, I think we have now 20 or 21 different books. All of those books are translations in French from more or less famous libertarian books from, yes, all of them coming from the English language. You will find the French version of Democracy, the God That Fell from Hope. You will find the French version of Market for Liberty from the Tan Hill, and some of the writing from Hope, some of the writings from even from Étienne de la Boétie, because we have re-edited him with an introduction by Murray Rothbard. So different books, which all of them have, I believe, some interests from a libertarian perspective, which we wanted to bring into the French speaking people, to la francophonie, so that it will be at last available for those people in other ways than only reading in English. Probably those two projects are the most prominent, I would say, from what I've been involved in lately, but there are others as well.
That's brilliant. I have this perspective that uh, not only the books that have to be available in the local language, but also it's important to create local content. What I mean by that is bringing the libertarian analysis to France, to Portugal, to Spain for local problems. I think that it's easier for make to for the people to relate, you know.
Absolutely. Of course, not everyone will be reading English. That's the obvious first criterion, obviously. But we also try, inconsistently, but certainly we systematically try to give a number of notes when we do the translation. So we not only translate the book, and we always, by the way, we always try to be very, very close to the original meaning and text from the author. I mean, I really want to avoid translations which are trying to give some interpretation or the translator understanding of. No, that's really something I'm moving away. As much as possible, we are trying to give a translation which is as close as possible from the original meaning and text. So that's a side comment. But I think it's important precisely to bring the, I would say, quote unquote, the right original message. That's the point. But still, while we're doing this, we also provide quite a number of translators' notes to try to bring perspectives or understanding, or should the original text have anything specific. Like, for instance, we have a book from Murray Rothbard on feminism, which was written in the 70s in the US. And of course, there are numerous mentions of the current political and cultural context in the US at the time. Anyone reading this, even in French, would not understand a number of terms that Rothbard uses, or the people that he refers to and mentions, if we were not helping the reader by trying to say, oh, by the way, this lady or this gentleman that is mentioning was playing that kind of role at the time, or was famous for this or that reason, or this magazine that is referring to would typically at the time be favoring this kind of political mindset or whatever, that kind of message. So of course it depends on the translation, but each time that we think it necessary, we do try to provide such perspective in addition to the standard translation, so that people would be able to completely absorb the original meaning from the author.
That's very interesting. And another question is, who are the biggest libertarian figures in France nowadays?
Good question. Now, unfortunately, I don't think there are too many that I'm aware of, at least. Um, Probably there was one. whom unfortunately passed away last year. I mentioned him already. For me, 1 year ago, Bertrand Le Ménissier was probably the leading figure from the academic world, but also from history activity that he's had. We still have other people from this generation still alive and active. Pascal Salin is probably the leading economist from the Austrian school in France, still very active. We have also Serge Schweitzer, another one in the Marseille area, but probably shying away currently, but still for me a prominent figure. We have, of course, Guido Hülsmann from the Mises Institute, who's a professor at the University of Angers. Is very, very discreet. Doesn't show up very often in France, but still is doing a fantastic job of sharing his knowledge on the Austrian School of Economics, at least with his students in France, which is very significant, if I should say. And then you find other people, many other people also would be claiming that they are libertarians. One name would be Gaspar Koenig, who's very present in the news, very present in the media, who introduces himself as libertarian, but well, to be honest, I don't think he is one. He is probably indeed a lot more liberal than others. Yes, that's true. But for instance, he introduced once himself as a liberal Jacobin, which typically means that he is a liberal favoring the central state, which is completely contradictory. But apart from those people, yeah, you would find people popping up here and there. But leading figure, I'm not sure, to be honest. Probably we're missing too many. I mean, we're certainly missing a real leading figure for the libertarian, unfortunately.
We once talked about the that the many of these libertarian figures in France, they were older people. How do you see the relation of the youth in France and libertarianism?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I see a lot, as I told you, I see a lot of dynamics within the youth. I see a lot of interest. Many people reading English a lot more than my generation. So many more people read the text directly on the net. So yeah, I do see a humming crowd, if I can say, from the youth getting interest in the libertarians. Now, how much of this crowd is structured? How much is of those people are organizing themselves in any kind of movement? I don't see much of that. We do have Parti Libertarien, which, by the way, renamed itself to Parti Libéral, which tells you a lot. There was the movement I was leading, but now getting silent. Some activities from individuals, myself included, yes. Many individuals, but anything structured, organized, uh, at least I'm not aware. I don't see much of that, of any of that, to be honest.
That's very interesting. Do you see any fruits of your work in the French society?
Mhm. Good question. It's very difficult to tell. It's very difficult to tell. I I tend to believe that yes, because I've been doing some books. You mentioned the Libre at the beginning. Now we also have the Libres from La Résurgence, Vue d'ailleurs, which is being read by several thousand of people. We also have La Page des Libertariens on Facebook. So there are many different channels that we're using to touch people. Any one of them is still very minor, but all of them, I believe, do reach out to probably quite a number of people. How much of those have been really strongly influenced or definitely, I would say, influenced by any one of them? It's very difficult to tell. Very difficult to tell. But I do see people coming to us, coming. So it's not black and white. It's not significant. It's probably a lot less than I would like to. It's probably a lot less than I would expect that we have as an positive impact. But I do believe there is an impact anyway. And that's the reason why I'm keeping communicating and trying to do other things. Because I believe that at the end of the day, finally we do touch more and more people.
Yes, it's very important to try to touch people in many ways, as you said, through the books that I believe that will build up a strong core, but also I think on the social medias you can do a lot of propaganda in a way that I mean that it's very easy to just make a phrase a meme and then it spreads like wildfire, no?
Yeah, yeah, true. Something I've been trying to do on this with different success, but at least I'm trying. I'm trying to do. I've been producing quite a number of memes. Not all of them being as successful. Okay, probably most of them not being successful, but it's kind of intentional. I'm trying a lot of things. I'm trying a lot of different ways. So I'm doing memes which are basic quotes. Okay, but I'm doing quotes in kind of very blend, neutral way. So basically, you have the text and not much more than that. But I'm also trying memes with quotes where we have a nice picture, so that at least the picture would draw the eye, would draw the attention, and then possibly people would be driven to reading the quote. So I'm trying to do a lot of things which would be visual, and so that at least it would be catching the eye, and then people would be trying to read and get the message. Also trying memes where the message would be humorous or ironic for the same reason, trying to basically to have people react. So I'm not claiming that I've inventing anyway anything. That's not my point. But the point is trying to mix up different techniques, visual, catching the message, etc. So to come up with different types of memes, which hopefully a few of them will eventually succeed in conveying the message. And I believe that at the end of the day, that there's probably a big handful of such memes which have been having a positive impact, hopefully.
Yes, I think the memes, especially if there is some humor in it, it's very, very powerful. It really reaches a lot of people. That's what I have been doing on Libertarian Europe a lot. I believe that the memes they spread like wildfire, especially if they're funny.
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, I think we cannot only go by memes because the libertarian philosophy and principles, although they can be very simple to express, they are so far away from the typical mindset of our targets, let's say, that sometimes, okay, it's nice that we catch the eye, it's nice that we intrigue and people want to get more and at least have our attention. Fine, that's good. But then we need to come up with some writing, some explanations. It could be videos, it could be writing, anything, but we need to have some more substance to convey the actual message, theory, etc. Because at the end of the day, it's a lot more to be absorbed by those people than only a meme or set of memes, unfortunately. So we need to be, I would not say strategic, but certainly combining different approaches so that yeah, at the end of the day, we need the whole complex of media that we can have makes a consistent whole and reaches out to as many people as possible.
Yes, I think that that's why I started the podcast, and I have been putting the podcast also on YouTube, but I haven't been using a lot of video. But I think that it's very important to have all these kinds of fronts, let's say like this, in which you will offer a lot of different possibilities for the people, be it through some very superficial meme with satirical message, or then it goes to something a little deeper, like a podcast or a video. And then there are the articles and the books that where you find really a lot of good content that would build a strong core for these libertarians.
Yeah, agreed, totally. And that's what I'm trying to do, trying to work on the different levels. Uh, so yeah, it's exactly what I'm trying to do. There's another dimension also, because that's the content we're talking about, but there's also the who are we going to try to reach? Who are we going to try to talk to? Um, and years ago, I've been trying probably to touch up pretty much anyone, and with time, more and more, I'm a lot more focused and selective, at least. And I would say that would probably be two populations that now, at least for me, I'm trying to avoid. I mean, not target. I'm not targeting. Let's say, if any one of those people should come to me and ask questions, certainly I would answer, but I'm not targeting them. And those two populations are, and one might be surprising to you. Of course, you would count in the communists, the leftists and communists in particular. It's not that I don't dream of changing the mindset or the ideas of the communists. Of course, I would, but I believe, and it's my experience, that it doesn't pay off. It is very complicated. You need to change pretty much everything of their philosophy, um, and those people very seldom are smart enough even to understand what you're telling them. So it usually doesn't pay off, with good exceptions, but it's not worth it. So that's one. I'm not even trying. And the other one is les libéraux démocrates. So typically minarchist in libertarian language. Minarchist can be of different types and different conviction, but there are some minarchists who have been minarchists like forever and truly believe into a minarchist state and policy and regime. So those people have been thinking through quite a lot the role of the state, the connection there is between the state and liberty. And although they claim they are liberal, they still believe that there is a role for the state. It is my experience that, again, same thing, it does not pay off. Uh, Again, with exceptions, but usually it does not pay off because they've been investing way too much themselves in trying to explain and convince themselves that the state has a role to play to protect and ensure liberty, which of course is inconsistent, but that's the whole point. So I guess I'm trying to find other kind of people, probably more from conservative footprint, or not so much so because I prefer them or because I would be one of them, but mostly because at least I would expect those people to have some sense and value in terms of how can I say, believing into the role of private property, and because private property is so much of a core of the libertarian philosophy and theory. If at least you try to discuss with someone believing in or understanding private property, then I believe there is a good background and a good field, I would say, for conversation with such individuals. So all this to say that having content is important. Having a hierarchical content from memes to books, yes, it is important. But I think we also need to be smart into who we are trying to target, because some people just won't get it.
I agree. I have been, for several years, I have been doing some research, making polls on the libertarian groups, several of them in several different countries, and I came across this data. This is not an absolute number, but it's something that changes a bit depending on the country. But more or less about 75 to 80% of the people that now are libertarians, they came from this, let's say like this, right wing and not from the left wing. So I agree with you that it's a waste of time. It's a lot of effort to try to convince the left about libertarianism, and we have to be a bit more uh, realistic, yes, and we have to think of resources that we have, and we can't be wasting a lot of energy on people that will not give back the results that we want at the end of the day.
Yeah. And again, I know of good and very positive exceptions. For instance, in Libre, the second volume of Libre, the one with two dash, the first article comes from a gentleman. The title is Témoignage d'un ancien communiste, so witness from a former communist. And this gentleman was grown up in a communist family, grew up as a communist, but he thought, he challenged what he was told. He tried to understand the world by himself, and he was curious enough to try to read something else. And then suddenly he discovered, I mean, uh, the liberal literature, etc. And then he shifted slowly, and I believe today is not completely an anarchist, but is a very strong libertarian anyway. And that's only positive. And of course, there is also a famous exception of Hans Hermann Hoppe, who himself comes from the very far left, but step by step came back to liberty, which is also fantastic. So again, there are good exceptions, and we need to be careful not to close the door to anyone coming to us, even from the left. But on the other hand, trying to target those people, I think, is in general is a waste. Absolutely.
Yes, I agree. We can't close doors, but thinking of tactics,
Hmm?
it's more intelligent to simply focus on people that are more likely to accept your ideas, that are going to be more friendly,
Yeah,
that kind of have some kind of values within them by the culture and by their families, something that's transmitted through time. I think it's a bit more easy.
yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree.
And regarding what you said about the liberals, not to be confused with the liberals in English, but the classical liberals, I also agree. I think our hope is more in this conservative people, because I think they have something. They are more willing to defend private property, in my perspective.
I think so. Unfortunately, there are also negative exceptions in the area. I mean, when you look in France again, on the right, I mean, la droite is just a shame, to be honest. So many of them having policies and mindset and way of looking at the world, which is which would not shame leftists, honestly, where they always think that the state has a role to play, where they confused charity with solidarité. So, and so little respect for private property again. They would not be ashamed from willing to tax people or to despise the rich and things like that. So unfortunately we do have a lot of negative exceptions as well, but still it is at least my experience that in many cases, if not most of them, as soon as people all really have some respect for private property, then I start believing there is some hope with anyone with this kind of mindset, and I would then start engaging. Sometimes it would be not fruitful, yeah. Sometimes it may take some time, but certainly, if at least I'm talking to someone who's not refusing private property, there is hope.
Another question. I listened to your latest interview to the French podcast Raj, and I remember you talked about shades of libertarianism in there, and which is the one that you are trying to spread?
Sorry, Lucas, I did not understand which what you're referring to. Which podcast? I did not understand. Sorry.
You recently gave an interview to a podcast called Raj, no?
Raj. Yes. Sorry. Rage. Yes.
Yep.
Raj. Indeed.
And I remember that at some point you talked about the shades of libertarianism.
Yep.
And which is the shade of libertarianism that you're trying to spread?
Yes. So let's quickly try to clarify what I mean by shades of libertarianism. First of all, it was a joke, of course. Okay, it was referring to the 50 shades of gray. Now the joke was in France we are more like in 50 shades of red. That was the joke. But indeed, we have 50 shades of libertarianism. Indeed, I believe, or at least I try to be one of the very, let's say, yellow, if we take yellow as being the color for libertarianism. I try to be very deep yellow myself. Maybe there are people even more pure, if I can say that, than I am. That's quite possible. But as a very strict Rothbardian, Hopian anarchap, I believe I'm pretty strict, if I can say, in the concept. But we find indeed quite a number of shades, to your point. Many people would claim themselves to be libertarian first, and I think we owe the ambiguity coming from the US, because in the US, libertarian means more libéral than libertarien in French. In other words, many libertarians in the US are not anarcho-capitalists, to be even more explicit. They are just liberals, liberal. So that's the very first level of shade. But even if you go more and more towards the Rothbardian, Hopian mindset, then you'll find a lot of those libertarians who are not adopting or even aware of the Austrian School of Economics, for example. That would be a very strong criterion for I would say, sorting out the libertarians. And I believe that if you are a real libertarian, you have to go by, let's say, the understanding of economics that are taught by the Austrian School of Economics. That would be one. Then the next shade would be the minarchist. If you take French literature and a number of reference, many people would dare define libertarian as being possibly an anarcho-capitalist or a minarchist. Uh, and of course, I do oppose strongly on that. But that's the case of many people. Many people would say, "Well, yeah, yeah, I'm a libertarian. I am a minarchist. Thus, I am a libertarian." No, I don't agree. But it would be a reality. And then, yeah, there are even different shades further away. And another criterion that I often find would be, for instance, on uh, copyright and intellectual property in general, copyright, patents, etc. Many people still believe that intellectual property, because it is so-called property, it would be consistent with uh, the theory from the libertarians. Unfortunately, it is not true. But yeah, that one would be yet another level or shades, I would say. So probably I'm forgetting quite a number, but at least those I think would be typical shades that I see, certainly in France.
That's very interesting. I I agree with what you said about the importance of the Austrian school. I think that's also the way that I try to go with Libertarian Europe. I think it's crucial. And unfortunately, I see that many people that goes more towards this Ayn Rand side of libertarianism,
Hmm. True.
they kind of despise the Austrian school libertarians.
True. I forgot the Randians. You're right. Yeah, I guess the Randians are well, they're certainly better than the leftists, so that's for sure. So welcome to Randians in many respects. I guess you're right. Certainly, Ayn Rand was not really an economist herself, which is fine. And I guess she had so much of an yeah, a love me neither kind of relationship with Murray Rothbard that because Rothbard is the father of also, or one of the fathers of the Austrian school, I guess there's some kind of rejection from those Randians to Rothbard and therefore to the Austrians. I may be wrong on that, but that's the way I'm looking at it. So yeah, you're right. I forgot about the Randians, but they would be yet another shade. They would be yet another shade.
So I think we are reaching the end of this episode. I would like to thank you, Stefan, for coming here today, not presentially but virtually. And would you like to say something else?
Well, first of all, thank you again. It's always interesting to reach out to other people and through the means of a new podcast, and it's always good to have initiatives of a for podcast like this one. So, first of all, I want to thank you and congratulate you for the initiative. Sincerely, it's always good to have such initiatives. In English is also always good as well. We may try to reach even more people, and it's interesting to share between France and the rest of Europe. I'm not doing that on a regular basis. I should, I guess, but you cannot be everywhere. So I guess that would be my point. I really believe probably the rest of Europe, if I can say, might need to or might like to learn from what is happening in France from a libertarian perspective because of this legacy that we have, which is a bit specific probably. And reversely, I think probably there's a lot of lessons to be learned from us in France, from what is going on from the rest of Europe. We probably do too little of this. I need to change that, and that's also why I'm here today. So I'm again, I can only try to commit myself to make myself available for such podcast conversations, exchanges, and any kind of discussion with the rest of Europe as to how we can benefit and learn from each other on bringing the message to more people.
I would love to have you again on another episode of the podcast to talk about other subjects, not necessarily only France, because you are one of the most lucid libertarians that I met through these groups in Europe.
Thank you for this. Very kind of you. I try to be realistic. I think it's key for a libertarian. If you're not realistic, then there's no way you can read the world and you can try to find a way forward that it would be any chance of success at all. So yes, I try to be realistic.
So, we have reached the end of this episode. If you like this content, share it with your friends and please subscribe to our channels. You can also support us with some donation at our website, libertarianeurope.com. There you can also find a lot of interesting content, not only in English but also in other languages. Thank you for listening to this podcast. See you again soon. Stay brave and most importantly, stay free.